Hot.
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Republican State Supreme Court candidate Jefferson Griffin faces an 11 a.m. deadline this morning to respond to the latest court filings in his election dispute with the North Carolina State Board of Elections and Democrat Allison Riggs. A state Supreme Court order yesterday afternoon set this very quick deadline. The election board and Riggs are asking the state's highest court to issue an order blocking the state appeals court's April 4th decision on the case. The board and Riggs also want the state's highest court to take up the case as well. Reading directly from the order, recognizing the need for expeditious review of this matter, the court orders Griffin to file his response, if any, to the respondents, which are Riggs and the State Board of Elections, filing by 11 a.m. on Friday, the 11th, April 2025. The state Supreme Court issued a stay order on Monday of this week in the election dispute involving a seat on the state's highest court. The decision has essentially, to this point, pressed pause on that case. Riggs and the election the Board of Elections filed separate requests on Sunday of last week for a temporary stay. In addition to that, court filings, Riggs and the State Board of Elections also sought what is called a writ of supersedence. Two separate orders earlier this week granted this temporary stay in this case. Riggs, who is an appointed incumbent, took no part in the decision. Obviously, she recused herself. Justice Trey Allen signed the orders. The writ of supersedence, which is being requested, would block the state appeals court ruling, which was issued on Friday of last week, 1 week ago, in a 2-1 decision. Appellate judges ordered the election board to take steps that would lead to the recalculation of votes in the 2024 state Supreme Court election. As it stands right now, Riggs currently leads Griffin by 734 votes out of more than 5.5 million that were cast in that statewide contest. A January the 7th stay from Riggs' Supreme Court colleagues has blocked the election board from certifying Riggs as the winner as of right now. Griffin, who is also an appeals court judge, has challenged more than 65,000 ballots in the case. Riggs and the election board each filed petitions seeking the Supreme Court review of the case. We have seen this case go all the way as high as a potentially federal court, then sent back to the North Carolina Supreme Court, sent to a Wake County Superior Court judge, then the appeals court, now back at the Supreme Court. This case has been all over the place over the last couple of months in terms of when we are expecting a decision. Well, that remains uncertain as we sit here and speak this morning. But what we do know is that, again, Jefferson Griffin and his legal team are requested to have all of their final court filings in, at least as it stands right now, by 11 o'clock this morning. We'll continue to track those details throughout the day. We'll have that news up on our website, carolinajournal.com, and, of course, cover it on a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. Turning to some other statewide news this morning, Wiley Nickel, a former U.S. congressman who was forced out of his suburban Wake County seat over redistricting in the 2024 election earlier this week, made it official for his plans to return to Congress. He has announced he will be challenging U.S. Senator Thom Tillis in the 2026 midterm elections. Nickel, who initially announced his intention to run for the Senate seat over 1 year ago, who is a Cary attorney, was a state senator before running for a seat in the House of Representatives in 2022 in a district representing Wake, Johnston, Harnett, and Wayne counties. His congressional race was one of the most competitive in the nation, and he defeated Republican Bo Hines, who is now working within the Trump administration. In a written statement from Wiley Nickel, he writes, quote, "Donald Trump is shredding our Constitution and billionaires are cutting Medicaid, Medicare, dismantling FEMA, and taking a sledgehammer to our education system. It's happening right now, and Thom Tillis is cheering them on. North Carolinians are struggling with rising costs, low wages, and a senator who cares more about his own career than helping them. I can't sit on the sidelines and watch that happen, end quote. In response to Nickel's announcement, the Tillis campaign released a statement referring to Nickel as a radical liberal trial lawyer. Tom Tillis's campaign manager said that Nickel was a rubber stamp for Joe Biden's failed agenda, and he is running for Senate to be a rubber stamp for the liberal agenda of Chuck Schumer, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. So even though this election will not take place until November of next year, and candidate filing doesn't even open until December of this year, we've already got Wiley Nickel, former congressman, who is throwing his hat into the race to attempt to take on Senator Tom Tillis. Of course, this Senate seat is something that there's been a lot of chatter that Roy Cooper, former governor of North Carolina, could run for as well. We'll see a lot unfold over the next couple of months. We'll pass those details along to you as soon as we get them right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:11, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Some changes could be coming to the North Carolina Medicaid plan as it relates to work requirements. To get some additional details on that this morning, Brianna Kramer, CarolinaJournal.com, joins us on the News Hour. Brianna, Medicaid expansion happened a couple of years ago in North Carolina. Now there's some big potential changes in Washington, D.C. That's putting some significant pressure on the North Carolina General Assembly.
Yes, that's right, Nick. North Carolina's Medicaid expansion is facing a period of uncertainty as lawmakers prepare for the possibility of the federal government reducing its financial commitment to this state program. So in response, state legislators are advancing a bill that would commit North Carolina to implementing work requirements for Medicaid recipients, and that would be if federal policy allows it. So it's a move that lawmakers hope will help protect the state's federal funding for Medicaid within North Carolina, just a couple years after it passed the General Assembly and is now law in the state with, I believe, over 600,000 people on this program.
Well, I think it's relevant to bring up to our listeners and viewers this morning that part of the expansion plan, which was the federal government covering 90% of those Medicaid costs, Brianna, if those levels change, if that number or percentage goes down at all, as the law is currently written, North Carolina would have to revoke those 600,000 people and their Medicaid coverage across the state.
Yeah, that's right. So that's kind of the concern right now, because we know at the federal level, there are a lot of cuts happening. And we've seen with DOGE, different government efficiency efforts, which, is all a good thing. But when it comes to this particular funding, this has kind of put state level Republicans in the hot seat because they passed this a few years ago. And now they're watching Republicans at the federal level possibly take it away. And that agreement, like you mentioned, that 90-10 federal state funding split that really currently supports our Medicaid expansion here is at risk. So this kind of comes, this legislation they're pushing, it comes as a policy signal to Washington and a contingency plan for what lawmakers fear could be coming in the months ahead.
Well, you mentioned that 90-10 split, and if, let's say, that percentage went down to 50 or 60%, Brianna, the state, as it stands right now, could be the one on hold for that additional money. You could potentially be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year that lawmakers would have to reappropriate from wherever else in the budget to fund over to the Medicaid program.
Yeah, that's right. And so they would have to find a way to increase the funding at the state level or find some sort of policy solution. So I think this is the first step right now, is directing the State Department of Health and Human Services to implement a work requirement plan as a condition for participation in the Medicaid program. And this would, again, only apply if this policy becomes federally permissible.
Let me ask you about why is that not allowed right now? Is that something that the feds do not allow states to put a work requirement in place for this 90-10 or 80-20 split that exists in some states across the country?
Yeah, right now at the federal level, we would have to see a change within the Medicaid agency or department that manages that for the entire country. So there's just certain rules in place that would or will likely be altered as the Republicans in Washington, crack down on spending and stuff like that. And so that's something that, North Carolina Republicans have already they said that this isn't necessarily going to do a whole lot of changing because it was already included years ago in their Medicaid expansion, this work requirement feature. So if the federal government allows that to be implemented, North Carolina will make that work requirement part of even getting on Medicaid.
Are we getting any reaction from lawmakers about everything that's going on surrounding Medicaid? What do they have to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think lawmakers are concerned right now and not sure what could happen in the months ahead. There's a lot of things that are unpredictable right now within the federal government. And so I think they're doing what they can. But we did hear from different advocacy groups who spoke at one of the House committees on health, and they were actually against it. Some argued that work requirements risk cutting off essential health care for people who already face significant barriers to employment. Some people noted that 60% of Medicaid enrollees already work, while the remaining 40% do not work because they're either disabled, too ill to work, they attend school, or they're a caretaker. So there were several different advocacy and political organizations that wanted to show their disagreement with this effort. But it is moving forward in both the House and Senate. This is a companion bill, which means both sides are working together on a piece of legislation. And so it's gone through a health committee in both chambers just this week. Actually, on Thursday, it passed the Senate committee, and last week it passed a House committee. So we'll expect more action on this bill in both chambers likely next week.
We'll continue to track those details. You can read some additional quotes, plus check out some video as well by checking out Brianna's story. It's over on our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. Where it's now 5:17, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on your Friday morning. A look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
It's 522. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. I want to invite you to WBT's News and Brews taking place next Wednesday at Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts. That's April the 16th from 7 to 9 p.m. This will be our first News and Brews of the year and the first one since the election. Obviously, there is a lot to talk about there, from tariffs to immigration, a lot of things going on in the North Carolina General Assembly, still a contested Supreme Court race, a lot going on, and you can't miss it. We'll all be there again for a great time with you. It's WBT's News and Brews, Wednesday, April the 16th at Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts. Visit WBT.com this morning for tickets and event details. Turning our attention back to the busy General Assembly this morning, House lawmakers had until 3 p.m. yesterday to file bills to be considered during the current legislative session, and more than 100 proposals flowed in before that 3 p.m. deadline. The Senate bill filing had already happened 2 weeks ago. With both chambers finishing their filing officially yesterday afternoon, there were nearly 2,000 total bills this legislative session. A more complete picture of policy objectives is emerging with all of that legislation. Education was a frequent topic among the last-minute bills, particularly efforts focused on recruiting and retaining teachers. So were some public safety concerns, including the effort to ramp up penalties on various laws across the state, and some other bills as it related to domestic violence rules across North Carolina. Of course, a lot of niche bills as well. We've talked about some of those, dealing with things like cryptocurrency and sports betting and taxes as it relates to that. So a lot of various pieces of legislation on those channels as well. It is important to note, and we've talked about this in the past, due to the makeup of the North Carolina General Assembly, many of the proposals that are brought forth from Democrats over the last couple of months are unlikely to advance in the Republican-controlled GA, such as pro-environmental proposals that take hardline stances on things like pollution and things of that nature. So it is going to be an interesting couple of months. Bill filing is now over. We will not see any new pieces of legislation be introduced. There was a lot yesterday. We'll continue to break down the details on that, and anything that does start getting some wheels and start moving in the GA, we'll pass the details along to you right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:25, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. A major event is coming to Charlotte in 2027. To walk us through some of those details this morning, Katie Zender, CarolinaJournal.com, joins us on the News Hour. The Military World Summer Games, Katie, a major announcement for the Charlotte metro area. What are you learning this morning?
Right. Good morning, Nick. So this is the first time that the Military World Summer Games will be hosted in the United States. So this is kind of groundbreaking for Charlotte. These games are hosted by the International Military Sports Council, also known as CISM, and this will be the 8th edition of the Military World Summer Games. So this decision was announced by the Board of Directors on March 29th, so just a couple of weeks ago. And it's kind of a landmark, kind of groundbreaking decision, because it's, not only coming to the Charlotte area, but it's the first time that these games are going to be held in here in the United States.
It kind of parallels the Olympics a little bit. They do it, I think, a year before the Olympics. Of course, the Summer Olympics will be out in Los Angeles in 2028. That ought to be a huge event here for the United States as a whole. You're mentioning this is the first time it's coming to the United States. Obviously, that meaning the first time it's coming to North Carolina. Katie, we've got a huge military population in this state, one of the largest, with our big military institutions, Fort Bragg and, of course, Camp Lejeune. So a huge honor for North Carolina.
Right, that's exactly right, Nick. And you're right. This event happens every year, 1 year prior to the Olympics, but it is in no way affiliated with the Olympics. It is also separate from the FISU World University Games, which we talked about earlier this year. And those are actually coming to the Research Triangle in 2029, so just 2 years later. But this is a completely separate event that is coming to North Carolina here in 2027. And you're right, we have a huge, military base here in North Carolina. This event hosts almost 10,000 military athletes from across 100 member nations. They compete at the highest level across 25 different sports. in the 2027 Summer Games. The Games serve as a unique platform showcasing exceptional skills, discipline, and teamwork of military personnel from across the globe while fostering unity and friendship through the sports. So this is a big deal for the military. You know, the president of CISM said, "We are honored to bring the CISM Military World Summer Games to the United States for the first time. Charlotte's outstanding sports facilities, organizational expertise, and commitment to the values of CISM make it the ideal host for this historic event," he said in a press release.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, you've got a lot of sports in Charlotte. You've got a hockey team, a professional football team, the Charlotte FC, the soccer team is now there now plenty of facilities for that to go on. And Katie, you mentioned this is the 8th annual games that are taking place, the first in the United States coming here to Charlotte. What's some of the history behind these games? Where did this all start and come from?
Right, that's really interesting, Nick. And another reason that this is significant is even though it's the 8th time that these games are going to be hosted, this is the first time following an 8-year hiatus. So the last time that these games were hosted was in 2019 in China. But when we look at the history of this, these date all the way back to 1948, I believe, right after the World War I, the first games were held. General John Pershing, an American general who commanded the American Expeditionary Forces, organized the first Inter-Allied Games in 1919. 1,500 athletes across 18 nations and 5 continents competed in 24 sports in Joinville, just outside of Paris. Then just after World War II, the Allied Forces Sports Council was reborn, and the second round of the Inter-Allied Games were held in 1946 in Berlin. The following year, in 1947, the Allied Forces Sports Council was extinguished, but it was reborn the following year as CISM, and the first round of those games were held in 1950, I believe, in Rome. And then the military, has long had a desire to meet in sports arenas rather than on battlegrounds when these games were born. They were born during a fencing event they were born during a fencing event on February 18th in 1948. And then slowly over the years, they started with, I believe, 18 nations, and slowly over the years, the nations grew. And in 1995 in Rome, the first official CISM games were held in 1995.
Well, obviously a huge honor for North Carolina. It's something that's still a couple of years out. We'll be getting additional details as we get closer to the games taking place. Katie, where can folks get some additional details this morning?
Right, they can read the full story with all the history and all the quotes and details at carolinajournal.com.
Katie Zender joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic this morning. A look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
536. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. North Carolina's Medicaid expansion is facing a period of uncertainty as lawmakers prepare for the possibility that the federal government could reduce its financial commitment to the program. In response to that, state legislators are advancing a bill that would commit North Carolina to implementing work requirements for Medicaid recipients if federal policies allow it, a move lawmakers hope will protect the state's funding. The proposal is being run through both chambers in the General Assembly as a companion bill, which passed the Health House Committee last week and was approved by the Senate Health Care Committee yesterday. Senator Ralph Hines, the Republican out of Mitchell County, said, quote, "Work requirements for Medicaid have always been intended to be part of our plan. Obviously, there's been a change in the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS, and we believe there's plenty of indication that their opinion on work requirements are different than they've historically had. So this actual implementation that tells the department to apply for work requirements to negotiate with CMS and to implement whatever is approved by the feds." The legislation comes as a policy signal to Washington and continues to play out as there could be some changes to the 90-10 federal funding split that currently supports Medicaid expansion in the state. The 90% is the federal government, the 10% just the state having to pick up the remainder there. Specifically, the legislation directs the State Department of Health and Human Services, NCDHHS, to implement a work requirement plan as a condition for participation in the Medicaid program as soon as the policy becomes federally permissible. Looking at some other comments, Representative Donnie Lambeth, the Republican out of Forsyth County, said last week, quote, "With all of the talk in Washington about changes to Medicaid, including changes in the percentages of payments change in allowing work requirements and other things, as I've talked to some of our congressional delegation, I felt that it was important to go ahead and step out and signal that in North Carolina we will support a work requirement." Lambeth, who is a leading voice behind the bill, warned that even a small 0.1% or something as small as 1% reduction in the federal match could have a major economic impact on North Carolina. He explained by saying, "This bill is fairly short. It's just as simple as to say that if the feds allow a work requirement as part of Medicaid expansion, North Carolina will be there as well to require that expansion." North Carolina's expanded Medicaid program covers approximately 640,000 additional people across the state, and if that federal support is rolled back, state lawmakers would be forced to either cut coverage, raise state spending, or find new ways to tighten eligibility, such as a work requirement. Lambeth said that if the federal government requires a change to the 90-10 rate, increasing North Carolina's costs, they are unsure how they will respond, but his proposal bill will study different options. Now, as it exists right now under Medicaid expansion, which was passed a few years ago by the North Carolina General Assembly, if that 90-10 federal funding split does change, well, then the law as it's written right now would require the state of North Carolina to revoke the coverage for those 640,000+ individuals that are currently using and taking advantage of the Medicaid program in North Carolina. This could be shaping up to be a big-time issue for the North Carolina General Assembly. Could have a major financial burden on the state's budget, and it is something that we will track out of Washington, D.C., and obviously something that, if it rolls out, could have a major impact here in North Carolina as well. So we'll keep an eye on it very closely. You can read some additional details and even check out some video this morning by checking out Brianna Kramer's article. It's over at carolinajournal.com. NC moves to add Medicaid work requirements is the headline. We'll keep you up to date there, and of course right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:41. Some international student visas are being revoked unexpectedly at colleges across the United States, including 4 here in North Carolina. To get some details on that this morning, Teresa Opeka, carolinajournal.com, joins us on the News Hour. Teresa, this has made some pretty big national news over the last couple of days. What's the North Carolina connection here?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Nick. So, yeah, we've got some international students who have their visas revoked, including 6 international students at UNC Charlotte, also 6 at UNC Chapel Hill, 2 international graduate students and an alumnus from Duke University, and also 2 graduate students at North Carolina State University, better known as NC State. They're among those that had their student visas revoked, although that reason it's not quite clear at this point. But as you mentioned, this is part of a bigger sweep. The U.S. State Department has rescinded the visas of at least 300 international students in the past month. So yeah, it seems like it's part of a larger issue from the Trump administration, what they're trying to take care of. And they also there's also something else that was outlined as well, that they're going to be doing some other work. There was an announcement on it was on Wednesday. So yeah, there's lots to ground to cover here, basically. But it's hitting North Carolina universities and colleges as well.
Now, I know you mentioned that we don't necessarily have any details from the State Department as to why these specific student visas are being revoked. And I guess that would make sense, Teresa, if there was some sort of ongoing investigation taking place. And obviously maybe they're not in a position to disclose some of those details. But we are getting some level of details from some student newspapers. They're providing some information on it.
Yeah, so Duke University student newspaper called the Chronicle, they said on Monday that their Dean of International Students and their Visa Services Director, they emailed the international students. And in the email, they shared that the State Department informed the students and alumnus that their F1 visas have been revoked, and that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE, had been notified of the revocation. Shortly after that, the government terminated the students' visa records in Homeland Security's Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. And you go back to the NC State story as well, which we reported on last week. They mentioned both of those students. They were enrolled in the College of Engineering. They were informed of their visa terminations, and after they consulted with attorneys and family members, they chose to leave the country voluntarily to avoid deportation. And also, like you said, their publication is the Technician. They said no reason was given, but another recent examples is the student visa revocation. Students were connected to anti-Israel campus protests, and others were canceled for violations like failure to maintain legal status or maybe a reckless driving citation. But it's still not clear exactly if that's the reason why for these students. So yeah, you're seeing that for a lot of anti-Israel protests going on as the main reason.
Well, and we saw many of those take place in the early parts of last year on college campuses. Obviously, the big ones were up in New York City and out in California. But, Teresa, there was some of that going on here. You had the things going on over at Chapel Hill and NC State, Duke as well, that did make some national news across the country here in North Carolina.
Yes, we did. We did. In fact, we have the image of the flag with the frat boys at UNC holding up the flag as they were the people who were in support of Gaza were trying to take it down. They were invited to many things. They had their own little I forget now the party they had for them. Also, I think they went to the inauguration as well. So yeah, they were recognized for their efforts. So that made national headlines. So yeah, I mean, it's been going on for a while. And as I mentioned about that announcement from the Immigration's Department, they announced Wednesday, beginning immediately, they would consider any anti-Semitic activity on social media when denying applications for student visas or green cards. So anything you say on social media, anything on content you have that indicates you're going against Jewish people or saying anything anti-Semitic, it's a no-go from that department. So they're cracking down on all of this.
Now, the State Department did hold a press conference earlier this week, and they kind of gave a little bit more reason as to maybe why they're not getting into some of the issues here, the specific issues as it relates to the visas, correct?
Yeah, correct. Like they said, they can't go to specifics, of course, because of privacy. But what they said they could tell us is that the department revokes visas every day to secure the border and to make sure the community stays safe. And they're going to continue to do that. Also, the spokesperson said criteria are applied appropriately, but again, wasn't going to answer specifics, adding the American people know that they take border security and the visa process seriously.
We've got a lot more details on this morning, Teresa, some other stories tying into this as well. Where can folks go and read the details?
Sure, they can head on over to carolinajournal.com.
Teresa Opeka joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 547, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time for another look at traffic on your Friday morning. A look at the roads with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
The Mech Mile, presented by Albemarle, returns to the American Legion Memorial Stadium in Charlotte May the 10th of this year. Whether you are a walker, runner, or somewhere in between, this event is for you. Kids under 13 who register are available to go for free. Don't miss out on your custom medal, t-shirt, and everything else that's going to be taking place. It's the Mech Mile presented by Albemarle. Register today at mechmile.com. It's now 5:54. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. A couple of stories that we are tracking this morning. One of the biggest, of course, Republican State Supreme Court candidate Jefferson Griffin faces an 11 a.m. deadline this morning to respond to the latest court filings in his election dispute with the State Board of Elections and Democrat Allison Riggs. A state Supreme Court order out yesterday afternoon set this 11 a.m. deadline this morning, with the election board and Riggs asking for the state's highest court to issue an order blocking a state court of appeals April the 4th decision in the case. The board and Riggs also want the high court to take up the case as a whole and potentially rule differently than the North Carolina Court of Appeals. The Supreme Court did issue a stay on Monday in the election dispute involving that seat between Riggs and Griffin. That decision essentially pressed pause on the case as it stands right now. Riggs and the State Board of Elections filed separate requests on Sunday for a temporary stay. In additional court filings, Riggs and the Election Board also were seeking to have what is called a writ of supersedence to take place that would block the state appeals court ruling that was issued just 1 week ago on Friday in a 2-1 decision. So this is something that we'll be tracking throughout the day today. We'll have continued coverage on our website, carolinajournal.com, and bring everything to you coming up Monday morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Following a landmark decision from the Board of Directors, the 8th International Military Sports Council Military World Summer Games of 2027 will be taking place in Charlotte. This year will mark the first time the unique event will ever be held in the United States, bringing global attention and economic revenue to North Carolina. CISM president said, quote, "We are honored to bring the Military World Summer Games to the United States for the first time. Charlotte's outstanding sporting facilities, organizational experience, and commitment to the values of CISM make it the ideal host for this historic event. The games are held every 4 years, 1 year before the Olympics. This event is not affiliated with the Olympics and is also different from the FISU World University Games, which are going to be taking place in the RTP Research Triangle area in 2029. There's obviously a lot of detail that will roll out in the coming years, but a huge announcement for Charlotte and the state of North Carolina. The Military World Summer Games headed your way in 2027. That's going to do it for a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you Monday morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.